Earlier this year, Russia invaded Ukraine, and aside from causing tens of thousands of casualties on both sides, it also created Europe's worst refugee crisis since World War II. Many international leaders have taken note of the conflict, with the United Nations and NATO members contributing billions of dollars in weaponry, finances, and assistance packages to the struggling state of Ukraine. It seems likely that their ultimate goal is for Ukraine to fight back against the invasion and take back their land. However, recent discoveries have shown that the United States and other nations are not fighting to help Ukraine win the war, but are rather only helping it survive. That begs the question, does this mean that they want Putin to win? And if not, why aren't they helping Ukraine secure a clear victory instead of leaving them to suffer at the hands of Russia? Let's get into it. The invasion started on the morning of February 24th after Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. In his speech, Putin pushed irredentist ideas, questioned Ukraine's right to be a state, and falsely claimed that neo-Nazis ran Ukraine and hurt the ethnic Russian minority. Just a few minutes later, missiles, rockets, and planes attacked cities all over Ukraine, including the capital, Kiev, accompanied by a massive attack on the ground from all sides. After the event, many countries came together to help Ukraine, especially NATO members like the United States, Poland, and England. However, this was not America's first involvement in the Russo-Ukrainian struggle. During his tenure as president, George H.W. Bush made a trip to Kiev in August 1991 with the intention of discouraging Ukrainians from gaining independence. Only a few short weeks before Ukraine announced its independence, and only a few months before the Soviet Union collapsed, President George W. Bush expressed concern about the disintegration of the Soviet Union. These were worries that were held at the time by a number of other Western leaders, such as the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. People had the misconception that if Moscow were to lose control of its empire, the future of the country would be characterized by an increase in nationalism, war between different races, and the production of additional nuclear weapons. In spite of the fact that they were successful in guiding the conclusion of the Cold War, these leaders were on the wrong side of history when it came to the question of freedom of choice for the people who were being kept prisoner in Moscow. Fortunately, Ukraine and the other independent former Soviet republics did not listen to them. The disastrous war that the Kremlin has been waging against Ukraine has put Russia in a true catastrophe, and the reign of President Vladimir Putin is sliding downward as a direct result of this. And as the Russian government continues to fall apart and the likelihood of its collapse becomes a serious cause for concern, the country finds itself repeating history. Right off the bat, the country was immediately faced with a significant challenge as a result of the conflict. The citizens who lived in Russia at the time were unhappy with the war, and their backing for it gradually began to wane. And despite the fact that there was a great deal of repression coming from outsiders, there was an even greater amount of criticism coming from within. It had gotten to such a poor point that when Putin announced a partial mobilization at the end of September, hundreds of thousands of male citizens fled the country for fear of their lives and as a way to protest the war. As a result of this disagreement, the rest of the world's leaders find themselves in the awkward position of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. They are concerned about the outcomes of the only two possible results of the war. If Russia wins, will the war escalate? And will all hell break loose if they lose? Due to Russia's unique position in the world politics and Putin's instability, there really is no way for the world's leaders to predict what would happen. As a result of this, many nations, including the United States, have avoided dealing head-on with the issue. The leaders are more worried about stopping Putin from getting what he wants than coming up with a plan that will give Ukraine a decisive win. The best that Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz could say was that Putin cannot win. And even though Macron hasn't tried to hide the fact that he wants to work with Putin, he has said that any solution to the Kremlin's genocide must not make Putin look bad. The fact that Russia is in possession of nuclear weapons stands as the major cause for concern, as any significant escalation has a very real chance of leading not just to World War III, but also to the total and full annihilation of both parties involved. Because of this, many nations have refused to provide Ukraine with the offensive weaponry it requires in order to even have a chance of winning the conflict. For example, in June, the US agreed to give Ukraine cutting-edge, high-mobility artillery rocket systems. However, they secretly added features that would stop the Ukrainians from using them with longer-range rockets, which would have let them attack Russian military sites in Russia. Other countries, like Germany and several NATO members, contributed the minimal essentials for survival, but not enough to win the war. However, Poland is the only country that is providing Kiev with as much military help as it can, despite its relatively small economy. This is because they dread a Russian triumph more than any potential escalation. This small amount of help from other countries has only unnecessarily made the war last longer, causing more civilian deaths and suffering in Ukraine and making it more likely that Putin can still turn the tide of the war. Still, it is strange that the Baltic countries, which are the closest to Moscow and would be the most affected by a Russian nuclear attack, are the least concerned about this and have shown over and over again that they would do everything they can to make Russia lose. The invasion presents a further risk for the region as it opens the door to two distinct directions for its future. Either Russia will use force to retake control of its neighbors, starting with Ukraine and progressing to other countries it once held, or Ukraine will maintain its independence and eventually become a full member of the Euro-Atlantic community, similar to what the Baltic states and other formerly ruled parts of the Soviet Empire have done. Both of these options are terrifying because they have the potential to set off a chain reaction that might result in a full-scale nuclear conflict. Any solution that falls somewhere in the middle, such as a ceasefire that puts an end to the combat, will also prove to be a failure, since it will give Putin or his successor the opportunity to resupply, rearm, and restart the conflict. The conflict is currently ongoing and has not yet been resolved. Neither side is willing to back down, and other nations are using Ukraine as a battleground for a proxy war, since a direct conflict could easily spiral into a global conflict. Unfortunately, the conflict has resulted in the deaths of thousands of people on both sides, and it has wreaked havoc on their businesses as well as their lives in general. The other countries have come to the conclusion that they must utilize unusual strategies in order to coerce Russia into calling a ceasefire. These strategies include not engaging in commerce with Russia and essentially working to bring its economy to its knees. However, it would appear that Putin is not deterred by the shouts of anger from the population or the sanctions imposed by world leaders, as he pursues his invasion of Ukraine with his sights set on success at whatever cost. So, history has once again repeated itself, and regrettably, the leaders of the world community have not learned enough from the mistakes of the past to find a practical solution to the war. Nevertheless, in spite of all that could take place in this conflict, the after effects of this event will undeniably change the way things are done on a worldwide scale. We have no choice except to keep our fingers crossed and hold out hope that things will improve. But what do you think? Is there a way to resolve the war without harming the rest of the world? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more. If you enjoyed this video as much as we did, check out this other video you definitely don't want to miss.